Apprentice family. Ken here, your Thrifty Apprentice. Happy Sunday, everyone, and welcome back to another Thrifty Review. In today's in-depth Thrifty Review, we are taking a deep dive into the Daler Rowney Aquafine 12 half pan travel set. Now, as usual in our Thrifty review videos, we're going to jump into a demo first so that you can see the paints in use one last time before I offer you my opinion. Okay, friends, so here we have our travel set. Now, a couple of disclaimers I would like to make before I jump into this review. The first one is, please keep in mind that all opinions and things of an opinionated nature are solely my opinion based on my use of this product and my painting style. My reviews are not sponsored, nor are they paid. I offer you 100% unfiltered honesty on any product that I'm reviewing. And just in case it matters, I did purchase this particular set for review. It was not sent to me, nor was it gifted to me. With that said, we have already done the unboxing and swatching for this particular set. I will be sure to link that as a card here in the top right hand corner, so you can go check that out if you would like to. Now, the paints in this travel set come in a really compact, convenient palette, and it just has a belly band on it for the advertisement. So here you'll have Daler Rowney Aquafine Watercolor 12 half pans plus 1 brush travel set. Flipping it over on the back, and I'm just recapping this really quickly. You get a color swatching with color numbers as well as color names. This is Daler Rowney in the United Kingdom. It gives a phone number, a web address, dalerrowney.com. Colors are made in the UK, assembled in the Dominican Republic. There is a AP stamp of approval. Let you know it does conform to the ASTM D4236 regulation for this particular product. And then there's a UPC code for purchasing. That is pretty much the packaging, and the information on the packaging straightforward. Now, the packaging itself does not include any light fast information, but we will come across that in just a moment. The palette, as I said earlier, is really compact. It's a plastic palette, and it has Daler Rowney imprinted on the front. Now, this palette is really reminiscent of the Lucas Studio travel palette, which I did show you guys in the unboxing video. And again, I'll say that I do believe that the palettes themselves are mass produced, and then companies are able to order those palettes to imprint their name on and put their products in. Not to say that Lucas and Daler Rowney have the same formula by any means or stretch of the imagination. Now, the palette opens easily. There is a little latch on the front to stick your nail in and pop it open. It latches pretty tightly, so you won't have any issues with your paints falling out. There are 3 wells on the top of the palette. It is white, so you can see the mixtures you make, but the palette itself does stain. I did some color mixing here before starting this video. The palette was clean, and you were able to see that it did do a little staining, but I just thought that I would present that information. Now, each paint, is in a half pan. There are 12 of them, and the half pans will lift out of the plastic molding here, as you can see. The half pans were pretty full. I do believe that these are all machine cut. They were level and even across each of the half pans. And each of the half pans does have information printed on the side. It's going to give you the Aquafine name, the color number, the color name, and this is where you'll actually find the pigment information for each of the paints that are inside the little travel palette. So that information is accessible to you, which is a really great thing. Now, before I go any further, let me say I actually did reach out to Daler Rowney on Instagram and speak to one of their representatives, and we talked very briefly. The rep was super nice and friendly, and we talked briefly about this particular set, mainly because I was contacting them. I was really interested in how I could get my hands on their new graduate watercolor line of paints, which was released about a year ago. I think the only place I'm gonna be able to find them is Amazon. The rep was telling me, unfortunately, they don't know of a place where they've been released in the market for the United States where I could pick them up at a store. So Amazon is probably going to be my best option for ordering those. But the reason behind the conversation was about those paints, and in the midst of the conversation, we were talking about the fact that I was putting this review together for the Aquafine and how I felt that they were pretty good matchup against the other legacy brand student grade paints. And the rep informed me that the Aquafine line of watercolors actually through Daler Rowney is considered more of a professional line of paints, and though it does target students, it's really meant to also target professionals. It's sort of the same feel that people have about Royal Talon's Van Gogh line. So I thought there was some really pertinent information to present in this review, and it also helps change the way I look at the paints as we go throughout the review. Knowing that Daler Rowney considers these along the professional line, and that's what they're targeting other than the student market, it does change some of the things I expect out of the paints throughout my field testing. So I just wanted to give that little disclaimer. So these are the paints in the palette. Pretty straightforward. There's not a lot to it. As I said, really compact. It'll fit easily in a book bag or a purse or a travel bag to give you easy access. Now the paints do come, or should I say the palette itself does come with a number 4 round Aquafine brush, and I do not know what I've done with it. Okay, here it is. Here we are. This is the brush that comes in it. It is a golden Teflon. It has a short handle on it. I really love the design. The color scheme on it is really pretty. Has the number 4 printed really big so that you can see the size brush you're using. And for all intent and purposes, you know, it worked really well. I used it in a few compositions here and there. I'm more of a long-handled brush person, but I do believe that this would work just fine in any of your travel situations where you are looking for a really compact brush. And again, it fits perfectly inside the little palette to go along with the paints. So no issues with the brush at all. It worked just as well as any of my other golden Teflon rounds. I didn't lose any bristles, and it's pretty responsive for a short hair brush in my opinion. So there is the paints straightforward. As you can see, I've gotten quite a bit of use out of them. They do give you this little divot as you start to use the paints. You can see where they wear down pretty quickly, in all honesty. So that was something that I paid attention to. It really reminded me of the way superior paints will wear with a hole in them as you use them, which most watercolors do, but I just think for the amount of times that I use this, the paints tend to wear pretty quickly. So that's something to keep in mind. Now let's move on and take a look at some of the color swatching that was done. Now I swatched the paints originally on my Canson XL mixed media paper. I do suggest that you swatch your products on whatever paper you use the most. In my case, that's mixed media paper and watercolor paper. So I tend to do all of my student grade swatching on this mixed media paper. And we'll get into that a little bit more. Used light bulbs for the swatching just so I have a little bit of fun, whimsy going on. Did some color mixing and an initial painting, which I didn't really care for, and ended up doing another landscape in the actual video, and we'll look at that when we get to the illustrations that I've done. So swatching the paints out, had absolutely no issues with them. They dispersed really, really well in water. I was able to get really light layers for my initial wash. And then on the light bulb, I'm not sure if you can see, but I did go back and do a second layer and then a third layer mask tone just to see how opaque the paints could possibly build as you layer them. And as you can see, the paints were pretty transparent in the first and second glazing. They will start to get more opaque as you layer them up, allowing the previous layers to dry, which was something I was looking deeply into, especially after finding out that they consider these or they use these to target professional markets. Now, most professional paints are super transparent for the simple fact of glazing and layering. I did find that you could get about maybe 2, possibly 3 layers before this particular set of paints started to become more opaque, giving you more body. So that's definitely something to keep in mind. But you can do a couple of layers of glazing and keep them pretty transparent. Now, each of the colors did come with a pigment number, and we're going to talk about those in a minute. Again, with them saying that it leans more so towards professional, we would expect them not only to provide pigment numbers, but to provide a palette that has more light, fast, workable pigments in it, especially when you have such a small comprehensive set, which is why I like to review smaller sets, because in reviewing smaller sets, companies tend to put the better paints in the smaller sets, whereas with the larger sets you get more convenient colors. So it's just been my experience that in the smaller sets you typically find your more single pigment, light, fast paints than you would in a larger set. That may not be everybody's experience, but it has been mine. Didn't have any issues with the swatching. I think that they worked really well on this mixed media paper. Of course, I never judge a paint completely on swatching, but at this particular point I hadn't experienced any issues and I felt like they were pretty transparent. From there, I decided to do some color mixing. Now, actually what you have here is a cool, warm, and a split. I didn't label it, but I can definitely walk you through it. Now, for the cool, I used the lemon yellow, the cad red hue, and the cobalt blue hue, which gave me pretty decent mixtures, pretty decent orange here, which was kind of pretty. The lemon and the cobalt mixed to give me a really like yellowish green, which would be pretty for doing foliage with. And I do believe that the cad red hue in the cobalt mix to give me a pretty saturated purple violet, definitely more on the deep end of the spectrum, but nonetheless a very beautiful color. Next, we did a warm primary, and here we used the gamboge hue. I used the alizarin crimson hue, and then of course the ultramarine, which of course that cobalt is simply the ultramarine pigment with white in it, and we'll talk about that in a moment. Again, here mixing the crimson and the gamboge gave me a darker saturated orange than mixing the lemon and the cad did. Definitely a warmer color, more of a shadow color. Mixing the gamboge and the ultramarine gave me a very beautiful saturated green. This is more so on the hooker's end, which I thought was funny because it comes with a convenience hooker in the set. But you can mix different variations of greens outside of using the convenience one that came in the actual 12 set. Next here, I use the crimson and the ultramarine, which of course gives me that beautiful, vibrant, violet, punchy, gorgeous color. I'm really impressed with that one. And then of course the split wheel here, we use lemon. I used crimson and ultramarine. And of course, crimson and ultramarine gave me the exact same violet that we got in the warm wheel. Using the lemon and the ultramarine gave me a different variation of a green shade, definitely much more towards a sap green than, and it was based mainly because I used more yellow in that mixture than we got with the gamboge and the ultramarine. And then of course, using the crimson and the lemon gave me, excuse me, a more desaturated orange than I got from my previous color mixing. So that's to say that the colors mixed and blended together really well. They make very recognizable secondary colors from the mixtures. They're pretty punchy and saturated. I didn't have any issues with that. There is not a huge shift from wet to dry, depending on the paper. Now, I did notice that there's more of a shift from wet to dry on mixed media paper than there was on like your cellulose watercolor paper or your 100% cotton paper. But it's always my opinion that all products tend to work better on 100% cotton paper. That's just my opinion. Here, I used the raw sienna and ultramarine in order to get a pretty beautiful gray, leaning more so towards Payne's gray. It's definitely cooler than the gray mixture I got from mixing the burnt sienna and the ultramarine, which is definitely a much warmer, deeper gray. So you can get different temperatures, in your color ranges depending on what colors you mix. But if you're familiar with color mixing or color theory, that's something that I don't have to tell you. You know that already. So no issues with the color mixing. I feel like I was pretty impressed with the way all of the temperatures mixed together in order to make really punchy colors that was not necessarily included in the 12 color set. So that was the color mixing. I then moved on because of course I did a little swatch sheet for the travel palette, which in all honesty doesn't fit because that paper is a little thick, but I do keep it inside the belly band just so I have a quick reference as to what the colors are when I'm painting away from my large swatch book. Now, I did some blocks here for a lift test as well as for the soft test. Now, soft test did not come out as well as I thought it was going to. They did react to salt, but honestly, they did not react as well to salt as a lot of other paints that I've used. And I was really surprised about that. So maybe I did not have that little swatch area wet enough before I dropped the salt down into it. I'm not exactly sure, but for whatever reason, it didn't give me the effect or the granulated textured effect that I was expecting it to with the salt. Now here, of course, I always do a lift test with you guys. So we are just gonna take a golden Teflon brush here and we're just gonna scrub across this paper a few times. Now this is actually Artwell 100% cotton paper that these little swatches and tests are being done on. As you can see, it will lift back, but I'm not sure if it's lifting as much as I would want it to. And that is, let's see, and I'm just gonna take a paper towel and just kind of dab there. Let's see if we can lift a little bit more of that out. The colors seem to be pretty staining, so maybe not the best for lifting. And as I said, that is a 100% cotton paper, and as you can see there, we do still have staining, and I used the cad red hue, and then I dropped in a little ultramarine to get them to blend on the paper, which brings me to them blending on the paper beautifully. This paint set is very flowy. I was really surprised. The flow on these paints are absolutely amazing, which is something I expect from a paint set that is targeting professionals. I do expect it to be flowy. I expect it to be some bright colors. I expect it to mix really well by pulling out primaries and not having to use the entire palette. I expect it to be pretty transparent, depending on the number of layers you're using. I definitely expect it to react to salt, to have different textures across the different paints versus it all being uniform, because you know, different paints come with their own personality. So for what I have seen up until this point, I was not disappointed with the paints. And the entire time I kept thinking to myself, the price point that this particular palette is set at. And on the other side of my brain, I'm thinking to myself, and these are targeting students and professionals, and I was able to see it. Let's talk about the pigment makeup of the paints. So the paints, for the most part, are made up of single pigments. There's only 1, 2, 3. So out of the 12, there are 4 that are made up of 2 pigments or more. Now your Hooker's Green is made up of your PY3, your PG7, your PV19. Your Gamboge is made of PY155 and PR242. And then your Cobalt is ultramarine mixed with white, PW6. And then of course your Payne's gray is ultramarine mixed with black, PBK7. And that's typically the formulation makeup for both cobalt and Payne's gray. Reliable pigments pretty much all the way around. Starting with your crimson PR176. Typically the carmine pigment, I do know that it's Carmine Hue and Daniel Smith. It has a really decent light fast on the blue wool scale. It ranges somewhere between 7 and 8. So it's definitely a color that isn't as fugitive as the original alizarin pigment, which is why it's typically called a hue, to let you know that it is synthetic and is meant to mimic the original pigment. The cad red and cadmium colors can have granulation. I did not notice a lot of granulation in this particular one. It is PR242, which is your scarlet pigment. I've seen it be like French vermilion, I believe, in Sennelier. And I've seen it in other sets or other budget or student grade sets where it targets students being used. So, you know, that's something to kind of weigh one way or the other. We had the gamboge hue, which is made up of the same pigment as the cad red, and then they mixed PY155 in it. Now, PY155 is a strange pigment. I did some research. I could not find an ASTM rating on it. It's permanent yellow. It is used in a lot of student grade sets. It's considered a pretty opaque pigment. And on the blue wool scale, according to artistcreation.com, that particular pigment is an 8. So it's supposed to be pretty light fast. So although it's a mixture and mixing pigments can tend to lessen the light fastness of it, both of those pigments have pretty decent light fast ratings. The next one, your lemon yellow, is PY3, which is pretty standard. Lemon yellow, light yellow. I've also seen it called Hansa yellow. Pretty transparent, has a really decent light fast rating of about 7 or 8. Your Hooker's green, you got your PY3, which was your lemon yellow pigment. PG7, which we know is the phthalo green pigment. It's called Windsor green in like most of your Winsor Newton palettes. It's pretty transparent. I'm gonna say more semi-transparent, semi-opaque. Doesn't offer any granulation, and it is a really light fast pigment. It's also mixed with PV19, which is like your quinacridone pigments. I've seen it called Permanent Rose or Queen Rose. It's got about a 6 or 7 light fast rating on the blue wool scale. So although not as light fast as the other pigments we've talked about, still pretty light fast. Of course, your next two colors, your ultramarine and your cobalt blue, are made up of PB29 with PW6 being mixed into the cobalt. Now, PW6 is titanium white. It is a really light fast white pigment, along with ultramarine blue, PB29, also referred to as French ultramarine or ultramarine deep. Has really nice granulating textures to it, and of course PB29 is one of your more stable light fast pigments as well. So you're definitely going to get granulation and texture out of both of those colors. Moving on to your yellow ochre, which is your PY42. Iron oxide or yellow iron oxide is a pretty common stable pigment. It is pretty opaque. It's all, I mean, you may see it referred to as yellow ochre, Rossiana, so it'll be in those color names, and it is a pretty stable light fast pigment as well. I've never had any issues with that one. Next up we have the Rossiana, which is PBR7, another iron oxide. We've also seen it called burnt sienna or be mixed with PBK, pigment black, in order to make sepia. It's pretty transparent. It's got an 8 on the blue wool, so it's a pretty light fast, but it has just a little bit of texture in it, as you can see here. So I really like raw sienna, and I really like using it in the place of yellow ochre in a lot of compositions, just really depending on what I'm doing. Next up is your burnt sienna color. Your burnt sienna color is made of PR101. Now, PR101 is a standard red iron oxide pigment that is used in a lot of student grade paints. Now, there are other pigments that are used to make burnt sienna, but this is the standard one in student grades. There are some professional paints that use it. It could be called Venetian red. It could be called English red or Indian red. It is a pretty opaque pigment in all honesty. It has a little granulation to it depending on the brand, and it is about a 7 or 8 on the blue wool. So again, another stable light fast pigment. But most of your iron oxide pigments, you're going to find that they're stable and light fast anyway. We're rounding up the last two, Payne's Gray. As I mentioned earlier, that one is made from PBK7 and PB29. We know that PB29 is an ultramarine pigment, and then they do mix PBK7, which is lamp black or carbon black. I've seen it referred to. And I do know that it is semi-opaque, doesn't have much granulation to it, not lamp black anyway. But it is a really reliable and stable pigment with an 8 on the blue wool scale. And then of course, lastly, we have PW6, which is your white in this set. This is known as transparent white. I couldn't find a lot of information on it other than the fact that it's transparent and it's normally used to mix into other pigments to kind of stretch them. But it is a light fast pigment, and that's pretty much the pigment makeup of this set. So what we're seeing here is that we have a lot of single pigment colors that have pretty stable light fast ratings. I think that that is pretty cool. And here's the thing, it made me believe more so that the paints may be actually used to target professionals, because there's not a lot of fugitive, unheard of dye-based or even cosmetic used pigments in this set, and that is super impressive, guys, for the price that this set runs. And if you're interested or curious as to where any of my light fast pigment research comes from, I use two sites. I use handprint.com and I use artiscreation.com, because I know that the information on there is reliable and straightforward, easy to read and comprehend. Now, with that being said, let's move on and look at some of the actual compositions that were done. And any of these that are videos on the channel, I will be sure to link. Now, in the initial unboxing, this was the painting that I did not care for the way that it turned out. So on camera, I repainted, an additional landscape with you guys. And I was blown away at the way these paints worked. Beautiful movement with the ultramarine in the sky. As I said, the paints flow. They flow so well. They flow. You know what? I actually may try to do some loose flowers with these in a future video, because I really do like the way that they flow. Didn't have any issues with layering, any issues with the blending. As I said, they're transparent, so you can definitely see the things that you do in the previous layers through the ones that you build with. Now, this has maybe 2 or 3 layers of colors in certain areas. I didn't go past 3 layers on anything, simply because I wanted to keep this composition light. And I knew that the more I layer, the heavier or the more opaque things would get, and it may take away from the freshness of the overall painting. So that is a demo on the channel. I'll be sure to link that off camera. I played around with them a little bit more just to see what I could do with them. Here is where I was, you just heard me talking about doing loose flowers. This was actually me doing a flow test. I wanted to put down really wet washes of the paint and then go back with mass tone and just kind of drop it in to see how those paints would flow into each other. And they flow so well. They mix so well on the paper. Now, this is not a masterpiece, but this is just me playing around. And here I was playing around with the paints again. I just made a really quick little bookmark on some really economical paper. I think this is like that B paper from, from the B paper company. You can get it in Walmart. It's their cellulose paper. It's not the 100% cotton. But now there's a bit of a color shift. So this is where, depending on the paper you use, and paper does play an important part in putting together your compositions, no matter what you've heard. A really good quality paper is a really nice tool to have in your arsenal. As you can see here, this paper is a little bit better quality than this one, which is why I was able to get more vibrant, punchy colors here. Not as huge of a color shift as I did on like this really economical cellulose paper, although the color shift was not too bad, and it was still a pretty decent composition overall. Nothing fancy, but just me playing around with the paints to see what else they would do. I wrapped all of that up with doing the composition we did in today's video, which was this little dessert. I love the way it came out. I think it came out so nice. As you can see, you can get really great compositions with these paints. Now, it's so funny because over the last couple of years, I think that this particular set has taken a hit in reputation for not being as good as the student grade lines from the other legacy companies. But I have to wholeheartedly disagree. I actually like these a lot more than I like some other legacy company student grade paints, which may be another reason that I am more prone to believe that these have a better formulation and may also be targeting professionals, just because I feel like they have a lot more to offer than some of the legacy brand paints that we know specifically and only target students primarily. Not to say that professionals can't paint with them. Really love the way I was able to get detailing in around the cake, the way the paints were able to layer with each other. They will work well in a mixed media aspect. Here I was using gouache in order to get my highlights. I was sure to use the same colors throughout it in order to keep color harmony, give definition to my little cherries on top. Add in a pretty decent shadow up under the cake so it would be grounded and wouldn't look like it was just floating in mid-air. Really nice composition. Really liked it. I have really thoroughly enjoyed testing these paints and playing with them. Now, all paints, all products come with a con. I've said all of these great things, and I really do wholeheartedly stand behind everything I've said. However, the paints do have some drawbacks. One of them is that they will get pretty opaque if you layer them too much. That may be something to keep in mind, especially if you're trying to keep a really light, whimsical composition. I did also notice that the paints are not as punchy or as bright and vibrant as some of the other paints that I particularly like to paint with. That's not to say that they're dull. That's just to say they're not as bright as some other paints that I have in my professional arsenal. Other than those two, I really did not find many drawbacks with these paints. They are readily available. They're available in a lot of big box stores. You can get them on a lot of the commonly used websites that you would order from, Amazon, Jerry's, Blick. I think you can even get them on Joann's.com if I'm not mistaken. So they are pretty readily available. Now, Daler Rowney does not do a lot of distributing in the United States. This is something else that myself and the rep talked about, like the Rowney Artistry line, their professional line of paint, or the one that they definitely use, their top line. You can get them on Amazon. From what I sourced, they're extremely high on there. But I have not been able to find that line of paints in a department store or a big box store of any type. The other line that you cannot readily get is what we spoke about earlier, the graduate line. Now, the rep did let me know that that line is specifically meant to target the student grade audience. So they consider their target, their graduate watercolor paints, their student line, and their Aquafine and their Rowney artistry lines of watercolor paints are their professional line. And this is the information that I got from the source itself, just so you guys know. And then they also have a fourth line of watercolor known as the Simply line. That line targets beginners specifically, and we are going to take a deeper dive into that particular line since it is the other set that is readily available in the United States. Now, I did a review on the Simply line a couple of years ago. I'm going to do an updated review on that because I feel like I may not have been as nice and kind as I could have to those paints at that particular point. And now that I have much more experience with reviewing paints and what I'm looking for and how they work for me, I want to go back and do an updated review because I want to see how they stand up against the Aquafine, which I happen to be pretty impressed with. I cannot wait until I get to the comparison video between Daler Rowney and Winsor & Newton and Lucas and the other legacy companies that have sets specifically meant to target students into the professional artists. So there you have it. That is the information I have on the Daler Rowney. There is not too many drawbacks. They are perfectly fine for painting. I think they would be wonderful to use in like a classroom situation because they are so affordable. I feel like they will be a great set to travel with. You can refill them on a regular basis again because they are so affordable. You can purchase Rowney watercolors and Aquafine watercolors open stock. So you do not have to buy a complete set. If you just wanted to buy a couple of tubes so that you can test them out without purchasing a complete set to decide whether there's something you want to do, you can definitely do that with no problem. Even the tubes themselves are super affordable, super affordable. They work great in crafting. They work great on mixed media paper. They work great on watercolor paper. I will say again, I do believe 100% cotton is the best way to go, but no drawbacks, guys. No drawbacks. I would definitely suggest the paints. Now, currently they run about $12 or $13 depending for this set. Yes, for this set, depending on where you get it from. They're about $12, $13 on Amazon. I've seen them in Michaels for around $12, $13. I actually picked my set up from Michaels, in all honesty. I didn't order them from Amazon, but I used a coupon, and you can get them at that regular decent price on Amazon all the time. Michaels may require a coupon, or another big box store may require a coupon to get them down to that price because, as you know, big box stores typically mark up so that they can make their profit margin. So that's just kind of how that goes. I can see them being used by beginners. I can see them being used by a more experienced intermediate student. I can see them being used by professionals. And I will have to say that based on my research of the pigments, the formulation makeup, the use, the quality of the paints on the way that I paint, I can see why Daler Rowney says that this may be more along the professional line than the student line. I did not experience a lot of fillers. I did not experience a lot of brighteners, and my water did not get really dirty and murky in use. Not unless I was using the same water over and over. So there you have it, guys. On a scale of 1 to 5, if you're considering this a student grade set, on a scale of 1 to 5, I'm going to give it a student grade ranking of 5. Yes, a student grade ranking of 5. If you're looking at this as a professional set, on a professional scale of 1 to 5, I'm going to give this set a professional ranking of 4. And I'm giving it a professional ranking of 4 because if it's a professional set, if that's what it's used to target, then I do feel like the paints could be a little bit more vibrant, a little bit more punchy, give you a little bit more color. But other than that, there's nothing taken away from it being there was nothing else that really took away from it just missing that 5-star mark on the professional side as well. So there you have it, guys. There are my thoughts. Hopefully you found some of this information useful. Hopefully you picked up on something from the review or the demo that you can add and take along with you and grow in your own art journey. If you did, please don't forget to give this video a thumbs up. Go ahead and share this video. Maybe there's someone else out there who has been waiting to hear or would like to know the research done on this particular watercolor set for their own art journey. Jump in the comments section and let me know. Have you used the Aquafine line of paints? What did you think of them? Do you look at them as a student or a professional? Considering the fact that I now have had confirmation from a Daler Rowney representative that these are supposedly more so along the professional range, and that's who they are actually targeting with them. So let me know what you guys think of that. If you're new to the channel or you're returning and you haven't subscribed, go ahead, hit that subscription button and that notification bell so you won't miss any of the new content. We have so much coming. And I try to dive really deep into this stuff and offer you as much information as I possibly can so that you can make the best informed decision on whether or not you want to add these to your art supply journey. You can check the video description for all of the relevant links where you can source the paints from. You can check out Patreon, you can check out Etsy, you can also check out the Thrifty Apprentice sponsored Facebook group, Paints, Pencils, Pastels, and Markers, where we do all things artsy and crafty, and all artists and crafters, regardless of your medium, are welcome. Guys, thank you so much for joining me for this review today. I hope it was really, really helpful to you. And remember, as I always tell you, just keep painting and crafting.